long-time interest in early childhood?
I'm Philip Melcher with the Community Foundation of Western North Carolina, and I've been involved since the beginning and happy to be here in person again.
Mitch Johnston, psychologist locally, secretary of the committee, been here since the beginning as well.
Are we introducing ourselves?
Perfect time.
Kit Kramer, I'm with the Asheville Chamber. Wendy Weaver, I'm a retired early childhood educator.
I'm Linda McDaniel, fairly new. I'm with the Arcabout County.
Mal Whiteside's county commissioner, at least for another week. I've been on the board, on this committee ever since it started. And, I've been on for 24 years. I was on university and public school board. So education has always been an interest of mine.
I'm Sarah Joss. I'm a grants manager with Strategic Partnerships.
I'm sorry, so what was your role again?
I'm a grants manager with Strategic Partnerships.
Great.
And Jasmine Beach Ferrara on County Commission with Al, and our colleague Robert Presley sends his regrets today, so will not be able to join us. But I'm very glad to be here, y'all.
Good afternoon, everyone. Rachel Nygaard here, Strategic Partnerships Director, so on staff with Buncombe County. Do not fear, Angeline is still here. She's virtual today. And Sarah is an expansion to our team.
Hi there, everyone. Mark Taft, I'm a community member and a retired elementary principal, moved down here from Vermont.
Good afternoon, Carol Steen, also a community member and current Vice President of Talent and Human Resources for Biltmore Farms.
Brandy Bowman, I am a community member at large.
Misty Pagville, I have been here at the beginning with you all. I am from UNC Charlotte. We provide mentors and evaluators throughout the 15 counties in Western North Carolina that support North Carolina NC pre-K teachers specifically. So we have about 180 teachers on this side of the state.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you all so much for being with us. And just want to remind folks that you received by email meeting materials, including our agenda, minutes of our September meeting, and some materials that we'll walk through together today related to our application for the coming grant cycle. Those are also available on the Early Childhood Education landing page on the county website. And our first item of business is to review and approve minutes from our September 6th meeting. So give folks a chance to look at those and take a motion whenever we're ready.
I move that be approved.
Great, we have a motion for approval and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Great, the minutes pass. Moving on to old business, our first item is check-in and report backs about the site visits that have happened so far. So turn things over to Rachel to help facilitate that conversation.
We are in the midst of site visits. Thank you to all of you who have given time and energy. They've been really valuable and informative for me as staff. And since we are in the midst of those site visits, wanted to give a reminder to please, while it's fresh on your mind, do the survey where you capture thoughts and ideas to share back to either other members of the committee, or if there's feedback or questions that you want to share back to the grantees you visit, there's a place on the form to do that. And thought it might be helpful to have some time on the agenda for open conversation about how the site visits are going for you. Did you have a question?
Could you remind me where to find the survey?
We will send you the link.
Okay. Thank you.
You probably have an email from Angeline with it in there somewhere. I think that's where I've stored mine.
Buried somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Massive.
Search on Angeline and see what comes
Junk
up.
email.
That's what I do.
So this, Rachel, this evaluation we have here in our packet, this isn't for the site visit. This is for
The application.
That's correct.
for
That's
the multi-year.
the funding application for the next cycle.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just want to make sure.
for me as a newer community member, I think one of the ahas was how consistent some of the challenges were across the different organizations. One of those being staffing, and in particular, several that I participated in indicated that the onboarding process for new, childcare educators or providers were taking 4 to 6 upwards and, in length of time to get the fingerprint and background check completed, which, in an environment like this where the labor market is really challenging, that time to fill is really important. So that was a consistent message I heard.
And most had dropped the drug testing also.
What, completely or just for certain drugs?
Well, the one I went to, they said they had dropped it and they didn't say it. They just said it had been dropped.
Huh.
I didn't hear.
That's not required by the state, or I guess not. Somebody out there, over there in the crowd is saying no, right? Okay.
It was great having an HR professional to advise and consult on hiring process and recruitment, best practices and ways of enhancing it. We've also talked with some of our grantees about the parts of onboarding that are within county control in terms of fingerprinting, and got some ideas about informing the applicants about how to best navigate that process and things that we can do to try to speed that up. And then parts of the onboarding process that are less in local control, the state's DCDEE background checking. So good to be seeing things across those site visits and looking for ways we can nudge the system.
Any other feedback or reflections?
Guess the only other thing I would add, which would be a consistent piece, is that what the 2 places I've been, they both have space, but they can't get the employees. And they have room to expand, and numbers of students that they can serve, children they can serve. But it's just a matter of staffing.
And this may not be the appropriate time, but I just want to mention it because last week I was in a classroom and teachers were in tears because there's not enough staffing, and they have children in Head Start that they aren't able to really do what needs to be done because of the lack of staffing. And parents are getting frustrated, staff are getting frustrated, and they're saying, I just feel like quitting. So somehow, I mean, there has to be some type of backup to support them and to get more staff in these classrooms.
Yeah, that's a good, I mean, it's a good question because we're facing that in every industry.
Yeah.
And I mean, I keep talking about our robot overlords, but I mean, eventually we're going to have to get really good at that, at robotics, to take on the jobs that can be taken on by robots, to leave humans to do the, it sounds like a crazy conversation, but I am not kidding, because the demographics of the country and the world show that population is decreasing. So I was thinking immigration, changes to immigration standards would make the difference. And an economist tells me, they're declining everywhere. Population rates are declining. I don't know what we're going to do. I was really impressed with Collaborativa La Milpa, and their work with people who are doing in-home childcare, because I think that's one of the ways perhaps we can meet the need. And I was just really impressed with everything that was going on in that place. Beyond childcare, it was pretty amazing. So I enjoyed going and learning more about them.
as a reminder, we still have one site visit that we only have one committee member signed up for, and that is for first on Thursday, November 17th at 9 a.m. So if there's another committee member who would like to volunteer for that site visit.
What's that next?
It is Thursday, November 17th.
Great, well, thank you all, and thanks to staff for coordinating and everyone taking the time to do these. It's such an important piece of all this. We'll stay with Rachel for the next topic, which is talking about finalizing our grant application and scoring criteria for the upcoming cycle. And you'll find in your packet attachments, including with the application and the proposed scoring criteria.
Great. We are nearing time for our next funding cycle. Our schedule is to open up applications in mid-December and have applications come in around mid-February. It looks like the due date on the schedule is February 10th. That gives 2 months for the applicants to prepare and submit their applications, and also maximizes the amount of time the committee will have to prepare your funding recommendations, which are due to our county budget office by April 30th, which falls on a weekend this year. So I think it's April 28th that we want to button up all of the work of the committee. We have included in your packet a copy of the funding criteria. I'm not able to display it on the big screen because of technical difficulties. But if there's anything specific we want to hone in on, I will help try to facilitate that process. The application and scoring criteria that are included as a draft are unchanged from last year. So the priorities remain the same, meaning we're looking for projects that address the strategies of increasing slots for enrollment, increasing quality, developing and diversifying the early childhood workforce, supporting families, and enhancing the effectiveness of the overall system of early care and education. That's the same information that they will submit, which is a combination of narrative responses to the questions and file uploads such as the budget form. And then the scoring criteria that the committee has proposed to use is unchanged again. There are 7 criteria, each scored on a scale of 1 to 5, each weighted equally, looking at the need, the project plan, proposed results, capacity, equity, budget, and overall. And again, the committee has the ability to take a look at its full portfolio and make adjustments. And then we will lead into a question about multi-year funding as a rider to the first conversation, which is, let's think about the annual cycle. We had some reflections about our process, and staff will continue to support the committee in being as efficient as possible, moving through that scoring and deliberation process that does, we tweak and enhance that each year. So the question to the committee is, are there any pieces of the application process that you want to bring forward for discussion or recommended changes before we move to the cycle?
I have a question. You are kind of the interface with people who are applying and need help. Were there any particularly thorny areas for people, or any areas that they complained about or had difficulty with?
None rise to the top. And just to remind what that interface looks like, we reach out to the community in general and specifically do outreach to providers that are in the early ed space. We publish the grant guidelines. We hold a grant writing workshop where question and answers can happen, and then we record that and publish it online. Then we have one-on-one consultations where people can sign up for a slot to ask staff any questions. They tend to be questions about allowability. What can, does this make sense if I communicate it this way? Is it all right to put this in my budget? How much can I ask for? Clarification questions like that, as opposed to overall themes about the process. It's a competitive process, so we always want more funding to work with. Partial funding is an area that is challenging because organizations come in with a plan and then sometimes they're offered a different amount of funding than they originally planned, and we try to work with them to adjust their plans. There is a question, I think. Is there a question about partial funding?
Yes.
Yes. If the project were to be offered a grant for partial funding, what are your priorities?
Thank you. So that the committee tries to use that in deciding partial levels rather than just blindly assigning partial amounts as a, as a formula or something. And then we try to revisit that with grantees. I think it also helps that the universe, the number of providers eligible for these grants is fixed because they've got to be in Buncombe County working in early childhood education. So we're working with a lot of listening organizations who are now familiar with our process.
I was going to say, I was thinking about this process and how it's evolved over time and how much simpler it is now. So I really commend you guys on making it easier. I think about that first application. It was hard for me to understand. We're just like, yeah. So this is, I think it's getting better.
I agree. Well done to the staff for helping us continue to contract that process.
It is definitely a collaboration, and we're open each year to thinking of ways to refine and simplify. As a side note, we are going through a listening process with grantees in general. We're working with a consultant who focuses on capacity building and teaching, instructing nonprofit organizations, who is working on a curriculum around strengthening nonprofit organizations to help with things like audits and insurance and various things that come with managing public funding. That's not a project that's specific to early childhood, rather public funding in general. And it's been a chance to have focus groups and dialogue with grantees. So we'll listen for ways to continue to evolve.
So I have a few questions. Can I ask now?
Yes.
About specific sections? So I've got a few typo type things, and I'm just going to leave you my copy so you can see those. We don't have to go through that stuff.
Thank you.
So on the second page of the application, I don't have any questions at all about the evaluation form. It's under budget narrative, and this is in the mode of simplifying things. It says, explain how grant funds will be used, comma, specifically what type of expenses will be covered by county funds. Are those repetitive? How are funds going to be used? And then specifically what type of expenses will be covered by county? I don't know that I would know the difference between those two clauses.
I respect your prowess of the written word, and I think you're right that the second half of that sentence could go away and it still means the same.
I would delete it just because it's confusing to me. I mean, that would just be a suggestion.
But what about the revenue relative to the funds? We say here how they will be used, but I think we get a lot of mixed answers on this. People that are showing revenue that they're bringing in themselves or from outside sources, others who just list how they're used and they're not even thinking about trying to supplement the funds that we're providing.
Well, it would be in the budget though.
Well, but how they will be used, they don't think about how they are also going to be supported by other sources, I don't think.
I see a difference in the two. And I could see a grant writer saying, for the first part, we intend to use the funds for staffing. But then that's such a broad level. It could be for teachers, it could be for psychologists, it could be for a variety of staff. That the second part of that question would then address specifically, where are you using it for staffing as opposed to the broad staffing?
Right.
Well, if that's the case, then I think you have to reword the second clause, because the second clause doesn't get there. It says what type of expense. And I would say a type of expense is personnel. It's not going to say, it's not going to give the breakdown. I think that might be really helpful. You may be exactly right, but you'd still have to say something other than what's said here.
You say what type of specific expenses, or please detail the specific expenses? that will be
Something like
covered?
that, maybe. Yeah, I just think when you say type of expense, it's going to get confusing and you're going to get duplicative answers and not
Please
respond to the
specify.
question you just raised, which is great.
Captured that. Lastly, your question about revenue. Do you think that a solution would be under the budget details to add some extra instructions explaining the importance of including revenue on their form? Or do you think it would be helpful to ask them to describe it in the narrative?
Yeah.
Or both?
Or helpful to describe it in the narrative rather than on the form.
We have a budget narrative and a budget form.
Right.
So when you were asking about revenue, were you
Right.
thinking have them describe it in the narrative?
It seems
Into
it
the
should be
form?
consistent, should be both to me. And it should be consistent. It should show a process of planning. And I mean, if we can leverage other funds with our funds, to me, that's a real advantage. But we're not really necessarily asking them to provide that to us. And I just found the last couple of years that you have some folks that just almost barely fill the form out, and then others that are very intentional about it. And I think we want to try to get as much information as we can, but I think the county would benefit from having other sources combined with ours.
I've got some language in another source that I could drop in here that asks, or that iterates the importance of fully completing the form, including revenue.
Mhm.
And we could highlight that during our workshop.
I think that would be great. And then this gets them to thinking about how they can maybe go to other sources. I think what concerns me, as I've said before, is we're into this now, this will be the fourth distribution we will have made. And I think there's some folks that have been funded from the beginning, and there may be some sense of, I'm going to submit my application. I've been funded every time I've submitted. Maybe I don't really need to go out and try to access other funds or think about the complete financial picture of this in new ways. Getting maybe a little dependent on us.
So my second question is on the top of page 3 under organization. And the second clause, actually the last part of the sentence where we asked for the demographics of staff and board. I think it's important to know what we would do with that information and not ask for it for the sake of asking for it. So is the demographics of the staff and the board of the applicant determinative in our decision to award a grant? If it's not, we should remove it. If it is, it's okay to leave it in, as long as people know that. It's unclear to me that an applicant would know that the composition of that organization's board could make the decision about whether they get a grant. And given a time when you have shortages in staff, like we were talking about earlier, is it fair to, what's the purpose of the question?
I took that question to really identify organizations that were representative of the community and had a commitment to that of representation of community members on their leadership team, and that those organizations would be supported because they focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Maybe that's a better question than how does your board represent our local community, or how does, maybe it's changing the wording. Demographics can be so many different things. It's often like we have 4 men or 2 Protestants. I mean, I don't know what makes it.
So a question would be, since this is an Asheville only, and there are very different demographic sets depending on where your school might be. So the demographics in Black Mountain are going to be very different than the demographics of downtown Asheville. So does that mean that we would prioritize a program in downtown Asheville and give demerits to one in Black Mountain because there was not enough? I mean, it would be a mirroring of the community maybe, but I just want to make sure we're clear on this.
So I think from a global standpoint and from a county standpoint, as a commissioner, I want to see that the county is being represented. I mean, people all over. And that's when we get the information, when we collect it from all of our boards and commissions, that gives us an overall view. Sure, if it's Sandy, Mush, Broad River, or the city of Asheville, it'll be a little different. But we want to make sure as a whole that we're being represented, that we're representing the people who elected us.
Right.
And that the money is going in the right place and we're being equitable.
So I just want to make sure that when I'm reviewing applications, am I giving essentially mental points to an organization that is more diverse, which means I'm going to focus, more of those diverse grants would be given to the more urban area. I don't want to disadvantage a group or an organization that happens to be in Sandy Mush, because I'm going to be looking at all these applications together and comparing one against the other. If this is a comparison point, given our different demographics in different parts of the county, it's a sensitive topic, but nonetheless.
I wonder, when you were asking the question, I immediately kind of went to equity and thinking about how I use that. And we have a section for equity, and I wonder if we have I add to that section right there that says, how do your, staff and board represent the population you serve? Gives them a chance to provide some.
The population of the students are serving, right? The families that they're serving.
Yes, that's what I mean. Yeah, the populations they serve as an organization. And then we would get some sense of that.
Maybe that'd be a better place to put it, because you're talking about the broader equity picture rather than having sort of a standalone here. I get the point. I understand it. I'm just.
And demographics can also mean socioeconomic status, right? I mean, that's a category that asks for many things. So if you're thinking about an area that is majority white, there's a bunch of different variations there too, right? Who are you serving? What do those students look like? What needs do they have? So
But I don't think those are the questions that this is going to elicit responses to, because almost nobody asked what the socioeconomic status of the board members is.
And under people served, it says, you may also provide socioeconomic disability / special needs status, community, etc.
Of the people served.
In the next section.
It doesn't say that. It just says, well, it does. It says, who will be served by this project is the first question. Yeah, you're right.
And Kit, that is immediately followed by the equity questions.
Yeah.
So Susan's suggestion, if we add a sentence to the equity question stating something along the lines of, describe how your staff and board reflect the population served. they would be right next to one another and flow nicely.
Yeah.
If we did that, would the group be okay with removing what are the demographics of your staff and board from the organization question?
You said that one more time, I'm sorry.
What was the question you're proposing?
So Susan's suggestion was it might work to add to the equity question how your staff and board reflect the population. We did that.
It's listed
To follow up
as
on-
an organization right
To
now.
follow up on what Philip's saying, we could remove it from organization.
It doesn't bother me having it where it is.
Agreed.
I mean, and
I'm trying to go back in time in my memory to the subgroup that worked on refining the application. And I think we played with examples of multiple places it could live. And there is a scoring criteria to your question, Philip, about will this be used? There's a scoring criteria for equity to consider how, let me read it, to consider how the approach is informed by diversity, equity, and inclusion.
And that would give weight to your answer. If you want me to.
I'm raising the question. I'm not suggesting that it's a horrible thing. I'm just thinking that it would fit better in the equity question since that's what it's clearly going for.
So without being overly formal,
Mhm.
the suggestion, maybe not the motion, is to cut it out of organization, add it to equity. Any
It's fine.
concerns?
fine.
I think that's good.
I have a concern. I mean, I don't know that it is deep. I have a concern about that because what we're trying to understand is their organizational makeup. And yeah, you can, I mean, I don't know. I don't think it's terrible to have it there. Overview of the organization, but everyone feels strongly about striking it out. I'm good with that too, but I don't think I understand the necessity of it.
I think if you want the material on the board, you're gonna have to specifically ask for that. Because under equity, they may not think to include their leadership breakout. And I think I can see for the commissioners how this is very important.
Well, the question on the diversity, equity, inclusion piece of it is about approach. So I don't think that would generate the question about personnel. So it's fine to ask it somewhere. I just, whenever I ask a question, I want to know how it's going to be used. And I don't want to be comparing Sandy Mush to the city of Asheville on that basis as Sandy Mush needs early education, downtown Asheville needs early childhood education. I don't want to be giving points based on how diverse a board is when a community is not diverse, or taking away points. It just.
I have some language about equity that I could borrow from the county's strategic plan, which describes equity. It describes how inequities exist across many domains, including disability, age,
Right.
gender,
Yeah.
sexual orientation, race, and that racial equity is one of Buncombe County's priorities
Mhm.
because of pronounced disparities. That way, the question in the application currently is how does your organization define equity? We're letting them know the Buncombe County approach and what is their approach.
That sounds,
Meaning
yeah, that would be helpful, I think.
it can be interpreted and applied differently in different states.
Okay, I'll let it go. The next question I have is under project plan, and this is a technical question, I guess, but we say include the overall purpose in any models or evidence-based practices that will be included. Evidence-based is a term of art in early childhood, and maybe everybody knows that, but there's also a category called evidence-informed, and all of this is a creation of Smart Start. And the list changes. So right now, they're So there's evidence-based that's well-established, that's one category, evidence-based that's established, evidence-informed that's promising, and evidence-informed that's emerging. And my question is that really what we're trying to get at? Are we really saying that we want to know which ones on Smart Start's list of evidence-based they're using? And if it is, should we extend it to evidence-informed?
Or should it be
Or are we using
research proven?
evidence-based?
Or should
Yeah.
it be research proven?
That's
Well,
what
If we've got evidence-based,
Right. That's
we
why
ought
I'm thinking you just take out any question about whether anybody understands what evidence base is. Just say research proven. And I mean, does that get to your,
I don't know. I mean, I'm not the early childhood expert. I'm just trying to say, I know that happens to be a real technical term of art. So some people will know what evidence-based means and others won't really understand probably.
Rachel, has that come up from applicants?
The conversations I remember having, I leaned on the fact that it says models or evidence-based practices, so they don't have to have it be evidence-based.
Sure.
And if they're using something evidence-based, they can share about it.
So let's just say Dolly Parton's Imagination Library is evidence-informed as an emerging practice, but it's not evidence-based. But the Nurse Family Partnership is evidence-based. But, I'm fine with it. I just wanted to make sure that if we were using that language, that's what we intended to elicit.
Want to say evidence-based or evidence-informed?
If that's what we mean, if we really mean those lists that are published by the,
I think we're trying to understand for a broader way of applicants, some of whom will be very tethered into that, others of whom
Right.
are operating in different spaces, like, what are you proposing that's based on research models and evidence out there? So I think we want to make sure to keep the language broad enough that
Yeah.
it would resonate for anybody and hopefully just be an invitation to share anything that falls under those broad
well,
umbrellas.
maybe if you said something that's, what models or whatever are you using, are they based on evidence or research? Something along that line, because evidence-based means something really particular.
Do we have a list of definitions or
I was gonna say.
language glossary or something like that, Rachel, that,
When we spend a lot of time working on research based with schools, trying to help them understand what that is, they don't necessarily understand that it's their curriculum or letters
Right.
training or, so some tangible examples might be.
You could probably just do it parenthetically with, I think at to the earliest point made, this is a simple application, elegant in its simplicity. So maybe we could just parenthetically add something in here or an example.
Yes.
or during the training, during the
training.
it's just important that everybody have the same understanding of what the language means.
Right.
The equity of words. And that bothers me sometimes, I think, that we're not helping them be as informed as they could be, as savvy as they could be about their project, which of course helps the children, but also it should be total level playing field so everyone can compete equally.
So the current word mentions one specific level of evidence, even though there are many levels of evidence. Your suggestion is to loosen it so that it's reflective of.
Yeah, if you wanted to say what models or how are your practices, or is this program supported by evidence or research, I think we'll broaden it in a way and not use a term of art.
Any concerns with that approach?
So the last thing is under sustainability on page 4. There are 2 points. One is just to ask, is this an important question? There is a movement basically to get rid of a sustainability question, because for nonprofits, there's only one sustainable way, and that is to ask for more money. Almost nobody's going to be able to open up a thrift shop. Nobody's going to have a for-profit model that's going to fund these things, generally speaking. So there are funders who are doing away with the question to get altogether. So if it's an important question for the commissioners or for anybody else, that's fine. If we keep it, I think we ought to say, how will the project continue to succeed after the expiration of the grant, not the funding of the grant?
It's important we keep it because we're using taxpayers' money. And we get the questions all the time, the emails. So I don't know how we keep it, but we got to keep it. Because I'm not gonna take the abuse from taxpayers. And this is why they vote for us, to make sure that we do make the best use of the taxpayers' dollars. And we got to know that because if it's not gonna be sustainable, we don't give them the money.
Well, none of the programs that we're funding are really sustainable. Capital projects may be sustainable, but none of these projects are ultimately sustainable without more public support.
Right. But I expect them to get more public support and not depend 100% on the taxpayers' dollars. We've got to encourage these people. And I know I've seen that in the last 6 years I've been on the commission, because we have done a good job of downsizing that from what it was when I became a commissioner. Jasmine will tell you, we had people who were coming every year for dollars, but we didn't see any results from it. But now we've got to do that. I think that's important. And that's where that question comes in.
Yeah.
I was just reflecting on, like, when I walked in, we're having the discussion about what we've learned from all of these site visits and what we learned from, what I have learned serving on this committee is, one, what Philip says, that it's very difficult to sustain this work when we underfund it from the public sector to start. So I wonder, it'd be interesting. I just thought, as you were talking, Philip, about what do I want to know here? And I would love to ask, what is important for sustainability of your program? What do we need to know about sustainability of your program in the future? It makes it wide open to actually understand much, maybe more, like these things we've been learning from the site visits, that, they need a workforce, or we need better pay, or it's almost advocacy issues that we have to do something about for the ultimate sustainability of this, what's so important, which is investing in our children.
I was just gonna say, so would that approach speak to the concerns you raised?
Yeah, it would be fine. Yeah.
Are you suggesting adding in a piece about what they see as the crux, the piece for sustainability? Is that what you mean under that piece?
Yeah, my question is, what is needed for sustainability?
Right, what they perceive.
What's their perception of what's needed for sustainability? I
Add or
don't know.
replace money. Add or replace.
Well, it's similar to the language that Leslie was looking for in partnerships, right? What could you do to add to maintain? At a place there at that.
You're talking about diversification of income, Al, and I'm not sure. I don't know that I want to add anything. I'm just saying, I'm not sure that this gets to diversification of income to support the program from a sustainability perspective. I mean, at Susan, when you were talking, I was being rude over here, and you said, what would be needed for this program to be? And I said, money. Money. It's gonna be the answer every time. I will start a pool right now with how many of the respondents will say money. Because, I mean, we're finding more and more that the key to the workforce issue is money.
Surprise.
Right.
But there are different sources of public funding. I'm sitting here thinking about how the state routinely sets up these programs where they only fund 75% of the cost.
If that much.
So these folks that are trying to access early childhood funds, they immediately are behind the 8 ball because they're not funded fully. Well, if the state legislature would step up and fund what it really costs, that would help in sustainability across North Carolina. So there are different funds, different types of public funds. And are there federal or not just local, but state funds, or different ways we could push, as we have done for 40 years or something, but to advocate for the state to be more responsible?
Okay, how about, in addition to the need for funding, what is important to know about the sustainability of your program in the future? Took your question and added something.
I'm going to come back and ask myself what Philip said is what do we do with this information? To me, it would be interesting. I mean, to me, it would be interesting if every single one of our grantees comes back and says the statement you made, Philip, when you said this is not sustainable work, the way it's currently funded. If we heard that from all of our grantees, that could be very interesting to think about what do we do with that information.
Of course, if you put the question about sustainability in, nobody's going to say this is unsustainable.
Right. That's true.
They don't want to get.
This may not
They
be
know
the
that,
case.
they know that we're going to support
Maybe we
them
gather that
based on that.
information to our site visit.
Yeah.
But it also does help us identify,
It doesn't appear on the scoring tool.
and it helps us identify which applicants do have diversified revenue streams, which, I think points to models that we want to try to help both
Right.
strengthen and also
That's right.
expand. So to me, it's helpful to understand who out there has been able to sort of piece together the strategies and know that about our local system.
This is back to the revenue question again. Trying to fill those gaps.
It seems that it's helpful for the folks who are applying, maybe, they're not, Steve Jobs and haven't run a multi-million-dollar company before, and to plant that seed out there is sustainable and thinking about, because they are small business owners, right? So the idea would be, for them to begin to think about that, just that in and of itself, I think is useful.
Trying to land on a proposed edit or change to this question.
Could you read what you wrote again?
Yeah, what did you?
Try, good luck.
The question currently says, how will the project continue to succeed after the funding of the grant? Explain your plan for making this an ongoing effort. Another way it could be worded is, in addition to funding, what do we need to know about the sustainability? In addition to the need for funding, what do we need to know about the sustainability of your program in the future?
It seems like there's a desire for specific language about diversified revenue streams in there with that topic of sustainability.
I'd rather ask what we want to ask instead of hope that they're going to read our minds.
Yep.
And guess.
So revenue is reflected current on the budget form,
Right.
but this is about after. Is there a suggested edit to the sustainability question?
Well, that more long-term than just this year for this proposal, what are your revenue sources? This is trying to get them to think into the future.
Could you say something like, describe your plan for sustainability in the future, i.e. diversification of funding, and then insert, are there challenges or, are there things we should know as an organization related to that would impact your sustainability? I like the addition of challenges.
That's great.
Yeah, I like that.
Yep.
Because I think it shows that you're acknowledging that it can be a problem, but it's not against them. It's an allowable.
Any concerns or edits to Carol's suggestion? the meeting's being recorded. So we can go back up. Eloquent way that you know.
Good point.
Yeah, you could just say, would you say that again?
No.
And there'll be a panic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think I captured
Yeah.
our discussion well.
Does that satisfy
I think that's a great,
the original point?
that's a great adjustment. Thank you.
Leslie has something on her mind. Had you finished?
Another topic about the applications.
Did you have others you were
No, that was it. Thank you.
and happy to receive?
Yeah.
Paperwork.
You're gonna send this out, we can all look at it.
Yes, it's in the meeting packet.
Right. Okay.
And doesn't go live until mid-December, so we can continue to make tweaks. We want to make sure that anything substantive we do as a group.
Okay. Could I bring up one other topic that I always bring up, but I continue to think we need this kind of good thinking around it, which is this point about results. We ask here about what do you hope to achieve? And then we say, be specific about the impact your project will have on the county strategies that you selected. And we also ask about how to measure the results. A couple of things related to this. One, some of these folks we have funded again for 4 years. And my sense is we should be seeing results from what they are doing with the funds, or else acknowledge that they're having difficulty making results. And what does that say to us? Having hopes for achieving results is one thing. Having a real passion for making sure we are helping children move from one situation into another, or one learning opportunity into, reaching their potential. I don't sense that as I read the answers to this question. And I think what the county wants, I think what we all want is advocates to change. We want social change. We want these early childhood to be as effective as it possibly can be for every single child and family. How do we know? How do we know? And this is the question, Al, if I was in your shoes, this would be, and you and I've talked about this many times, this would be the one I would be asking, okay, are we getting results from this? My concern is, well, we might meet a day when the public asks us, what results have happened for kids?
So the way we build in that accountability is through their performance reporting.
Right.
There's a disconnect between those reports in this application. So
yes,
we add, if this is a renewal application, explain the results, including successes and challenges from previous awards. That way we're not having to leave this proposal, go look up their scores and come back.
Yeah. And so say that again. So you would be asking them to report on what they had previously requested and what their performance report was by staff and so forth.
This is a request for future funding, so we would leave the, what do you plan to accomplish?
Yeah.
And then we would add, if this is a renewal application, explain the results, including successes and challenges from previous awards.
So is there a question, if it's not a renewal, they're completing the grant, so it's their final report. Is there a question that says, basically, what did you say you were going to do and what did you do?
What did you do? That's the point.
In the reports, not in this funding.
Yes, right, in the reports. That's
Yeah,
all.
it's a
reports.
side by side kind of goal and progress toward it.
Okay.
Rachel, when we are doing this, I guess help me remember, like, what's the timing of the reports, when we can read the reports and then evaluate these? Because to me, it sounds like what you're asking for, we all want to know, but the place to get that is in the reports.
So,
but if we
have we'll have half of a year's worth of report at the time that this is being deliberated. So because of the timing of the fiscal year, July through December will have already been reported on. We have the first quarter reports right now that we're getting ready to put online. We put them up every 3 months. But
Yeah,
the fiscal year is still in progress at the time we're making next year's decisions.
And to Leslie's point, we have, grantees that we funded for years before, so we could look
They
at
do have
those
those
old reports as well. My only concern of including that here is because we have a limited number of characters. So then some people have more, if they've never gotten funding before, they've got room to, do that. If you put that in and don't expand the characters, you could have.
Well, maybe if they've been funded before, they get more characters or to answer that part. Well, I think it'd be worth it for us to know.
Well, let's think about
This is what we wanna know.
simplicity. Let's think about equity. Let's think about, I mean, the value of them being able to, they're doing the paperwork. If they got the grants, do we really need to make them repeat it again?
I always wonder.
I don't-
How can they compare the current year though, with, if you're talking about student outcomes, with the previous year, if they won't even have.
This is part of our problem, I think.
Leslie, just say, can you maybe distill kind of what your concern is about this question in the application format?
Be specific about the impact the project will have on the strategies you suggested. So many times they don't answer that. They just, they're not again, back to what do we mean by impact? What do we mean by that word? And so many times in the ones that I've read, and I flag this numerous times with questions when they come through, is what changed for the children? What changed for families? What changed in your delivery of your services so that you can have a more beneficial impact on the children? And a lot of times they'll say, well, it's a fluff answer. Mm-hmm. And I think we're not getting to the reason why we're really spending almost $4 million. We don't, how do we know that, and how do we get them to make this connectivity?
Well, it's a different question. I mean, it's easy to answer if the reason you ask for the funds was to hire teachers. You can count them.
Yeah.
But the real outcomes we want about what's better for children, you can't see that in.
That's a qualitative or quantitative.
You can't count that. So there's some built-in ambiguity here. If, our strategies are longer term than that. I mean,
We can ultimately look at kindergarten readiness
Kindergarten
rates
readiness, right?
over a period
Over
of
years,
years.
yeah. Right.
And I think, I kind of think that's kind of where the rubber hits the road for me, is that we will have accomplished our goal if we're seeing more kids ready.
Right, right. And we won't know that for 5 years.
Susan's an object.
I'm gonna just intervene for 1 second. We have 30 minutes left and we have a big juicy topic of multi-year funding on the agenda, as well as a quick legislative update. So I don't want to curtail important conversations, but if there are specific edits to this, would love to hear them, so that we can make sure we give the multi-year funding question the time and attention it deserves.
I'm happy to work with Rachel. I could go back and look at some of my notes as to what I flagged perhaps. But I think perhaps some of them just don't know how to explain, here's how I'm going to measure results. We asked that too.
I wonder if this is something we could ask the staff to kind of, address in the educational sessions around what do we mean by these questions?
Yeah.
And then, the one thing I was thinking is that, back to this discussion we had on evidence-based, evidence-informed practices, I think that's why we ask people to use, things that work, that we know work.
Right.
Because if those are happening with lots of children everywhere, then collectively over time. And I think
Right.
that big measurement is at a community level, not at the level of these organizations to kind of, say, what is that big change over time? But I think if they're doing evidence-based interventions, our hope is that they're adding to that big change over time collectively.
Right.
No, thank you all. This great, I think, ways to continue strengthening and clarifying the application. And Rachel, what's your preferred method of receiving any additional thoughts?
Contact me.
Okay,
Just drop me a line.
great.
And if it's straightforward and we need to just streamline something, we'll go ahead and do that. If it's a substantive change, we'll bring it back to the committee.
Does that work for everyone? Which fits nicely into a really important conversation we need to have, and today is really the day to have it, on how we're gonna approach multi-year funding. So I'll let you, Rachel, tee that up. And my request to the committee is we really are concrete and focused in this discussion so that we can deliver to staff enough content to really shape what goes into the application on the other side of this.
Multi-year awards. Those of you that have participated in previous grant cycles know that this is something that we often save for the very last part of our grant making process. And we promised ourselves that we'd talk about it in the fall when we weren't doing grant making. So we did do that in the September meeting, and we're doing that again today. In the draft application, there's a question that says, if you would like this project to be considered for multi-year funding, up to 3 years, what amounts would you request for years 2 and 3? What milestones would this funding allow you to accomplish? Explain why more years are needed to accomplish goals. So there's not real clear parameters about eligibility for multi-year funding. So a basic question is, do we want to still do multi-year funding? If yes, do we like it the way it's asked, or do we want to narrow or refine the parameters about what would be eligible for the multi-year award? Then staff can use that to try to help organize the grant making discussion, to give time for multi-year awards. And the last thing that is on my mind before I toss to Kit and the committee is, in making multi-year awards, is there a rule of thumb the committee would want, like a maximum of a percent of the portfolio, no more than whatever in a multi-year award? We don't have a lot. Your agenda shows the 2 multi-year awards committed for the upcoming year. It's 177,000 total.
I'm shocked by that. That was the question I was gonna
Others
ask.
have rolled off. Some of those big ones rolled
Wow,
out.
that's a whole lot less than we've had in
Whole
previous
lot.
years.
Sure is.
And we didn't make any new multi-years.
But I do like the idea of having kind of a formula of how much money out of the annual amount we can commit, so that we don't find ourselves. I am frankly very happy that that's all we've committed to. I was thinking it was going to be a heck of a lot more than that.
We had some bigger ticket ones.
We did.
And apologies, Rachel, the 2 that are included, is that what you said? There were 2 included in this one system. What years are they in?
I can look that up.
I think I'd like to put a plug in for us considering using multi-year funding to advance the areas of greatest need and or priority. For instance, we know that there's sort of endemic problems of workforce right now, and that we can't meaningfully create new slots without addressing that. And I wonder if we could kind of increase the impact of some of this if we used multi-year funding as a way to really put some muscle and resources behind, for instance, workforce development strategies now. And in a few years' time, the committee can assess and potentially put into, maybe there will be a different need or priority down the road.
If you don't do multi-year funding, then it's just a hamster wheel for the nonprofits. As soon as they get this, they've got to go be out finding those other sources of revenue on sustainability, and you're going to, you know, particularly in that case, if you're going to hire somebody, you need to be able to guarantee them more than 1 year of funding.
Right.
Otherwise, the job is even less attractive than it would be otherwise. So I agree with that.
We tied up a lot of money, this is my recollection at least, on capital projects in the past.
We did.
And so if those are the ones that have rolled off, I mean, is there, and again, danger Will Robinson, we may be doing ourselves in ultimately, but if we had extra money going into compensation, if compensation is part of the issue for workforce, are we doing ourselves a disservice by, or are we showing in fact that it is a compensation issue by funding additional compensation? I don't know. I'm kind of, I'm torn about the issue, especially when local dollars run out. What happens then?
I think I spoke to that back in the spring, and then thinking about the school system, they don't always have a certain amount in there for the supplements for their teachers because they know they need to supplement it. And, you know, we funded a certain amount of supplemental funds to bring the pre-K teachers up to parity. And if county classroom teachers go up, where's the money going to be to compensate the pre-K teachers so they stay at parity? And so I don't see how we can avoid it being multi-year to, you know, at a certain level to keep maintaining that, you know, that level. I just don't see where else, again, going back to the sustainability question, where else is that money going to come from for those nonprofits to keep their teachers, you know, the pre-K teachers in particular, not even getting into, you know, the toddler and infant teachers, but to keep the pre-K teachers up to parity. You know, so I don't see how we don't do, you know, a certain level of continuous funding, you know, if for nothing else than that level of compensation.
The two rolling off are YWCA at 150,000 and Buncombe County Schools Emma Werner project at nearly 800,000. The two that are still active in a multi-year commitment are Buncombe Child Care Resources and Collaborativo Milpa, who will enter their third year in FY24.
Rachel, of the first two you listed were, or of those, which were capital and which were service?
Buncombe County Schools was a capital award in partnership with Werner, that was the only one. And then YWCA was operational. So we may still see a proposal from YWCA in that amount. It's just not a pre-committed award.
I wonder if we went back and added up, out of the grants that we received last year, how many of them were providing a supplement on top of, if we could total what that is. I mean, I think you make a very poignant point about that. I still don't know. I don't know if it's going to solve our problem in the long term though, because I mean, I think there's an advocacy issue to be made about the funding for preschool teachers at parity with other K-12 teachers. That definitely has to happen, and I think it will. But that doesn't mean it's going to happen. And we can ask, but I don't think it means it's going to happen. But I mean, if we decided that we wanted to continue to pursue funding extra employee expense, do we have a responsibility to set that aside?
Many or most use the funds for salaries. Some do it in a supplemental way that's more direct. And many or most that we're hearing from are using child care stabilization grants in addition for supplemental.
I mean, I think we're at an interesting strategic juncture in our think about, say, the 10-year horizon line from launch of this fund to where we would hope to be by 2030. It's a little more than 10 years, where We have invested not insignificantly in the creation of new centers and slots, and that's a success. But this evergreen structural issue, which has been there from the start, where we have continued to sort of wait to see if state or federal funding sources get released, the needle hasn't moved there. And my personal strategic assessment is unless we invest local dollars to move the needle there now, we will continue to play this waiting game. And as we think about, you know, the point you make, Leslie, about sort of the imperative of like, are we creating an environment where kids have a decent chance of what we hope will happen?
Right.
To me, there's more than enough argument to invest the local dollars in the compensation piece and remain both sort of steadfast and hopeful that we'll see dynamics change at the state and or federal level, which I agree is where it ought to be happening, or the corporate or philanthropic level, or all of the above. But in the meantime, you know, we've sort of done all this hard work and investment to help create more slots. And it feels like we run the risk of just sort of like losing some time. The clock keeps ticking. And we know unless money is invested in compensation strategies, we're not going to be able to put those slots to use. So that's sort of where, just my personal perspective of where I land on this for the near horizon.
Is it compensation, or is it, or maybe it's more than one thing? Are there people who want to go through what it takes to qualify to become an early childhood educator, which is significant, and want to stay in the field over time? I mean, you can attract maybe someone initially with a bonus, but do these folks have their credentials? Are they willing to go and get the ED, 119? I mean, there are so many steps they have to do. To Carol's point earlier, it takes these providers a long lead time to be able to bring folks in. So, I mean, if you look at Buncombe County and our workforce, are there people who want to be in this field almost as much as you could compensate them? It's a difficult field. There's a lot to do to get into it. There's a lot to stay into it.
I mean, there's not like.
What's that?
If there are not, we're in a lot of trouble. So
I know that.
figuring out how we.
That's what bothers me.
Well, you've been waiting.
Well, part of my wondering, I mean, I'm a fan of multi-year funding because I think for all the reasons that people have said, I just wonder who we have committed multi-funding to and said you only apply once and get the money the following years. And who are we actually doing multi-year funding for that we're making them apply every year? And I would like to have more information on what that looks like. You mentioned we've got people we've been funding since the very beginning. And are we funding them, having them complete an application every year for the exact same work over time? Or are they shifting? Is there something about doing an application that pushes them to think broader or better? I just, those are the questions in my mind about, and to me, multi-year funding, I think feel better, at least I feel better about it with an organization we have some history with, and we know that they're going to, meet the goals that they put in their grant application. So if we think about, and that align to I think our highest priority, and there may be some things we want to commit some multi-year funding to, so that we have time to learn and show what happens, to your point, when you commit those funds over time, we should be able to, not only do the right thing by our children, but learn something that we can share from it. And that gets to the I have a bigger question about high level evaluation of all of this work beyond
Our
just the
building
evaluations.
partnerships together, is that enabling them to become more financially stable over time?
And I mean, are they also finding that, through if Buncombe has much higher wages than other counties, is the recruitment retention better? And are you getting people to stay in the field, and are kids getting better outcomes? Is that what it takes? And that becomes an advocacy tool.
Susan, I'm reminded of y'all's recent report that we heard when we were together last time from Dogwood. And I can't remember quickly if there were recommendations in there relative to compensation. But Rachel, if we could, and we could all go back and look individually, but maybe we could lift out from that report, which is, I guess, the most recent data we have, what those consultants said relative to compensation and to qualifications and to longevity in the field and so forth. So what did it point us to do?
Yes. For now, continuing to prioritize workforce and compensation. To the multi-year question, maybe we leave it as it is rather than narrowing it. So that any project can request, and we continue gathering this information. We can definitely bring like the list of projects that have received funding for multiple years without an actual multi-year award, and speak to some of the nuances about changes in program from year to year. Is there?
The other thing I think might be helpful is if we leave it open and say we want to learn from it, maybe for us to develop some agreed upon guidance, just, not requirements or specifics, but to say, just so that we're all on the same page, that multi-year would, focus on what, XYZ top priorities. It would be with an organization we have history with and has proven, just some guidance of who we would prioritize for multi-year funding.
I mean, I would say I support the multi-year funding, but for me, it's a little challenging to say we would support an organization for multi-year if we have history with them, because there could be a proposal that comes out that initiates with the need for multi-year without having had one year funding. But I think leaving it broad would also help us learn what is the organization looking for without putting criteria on it before we've had really good years to assess the impact of multi-year, because we've had such tumultuous years that we're really looking at the data now is just a small snapshot, that it is challenging for multi-year grants to be able to say, well, these were my results, because really we're just trying to maintain or sustain with the funding that's been provided multi-year. So I think leaving it broad right now and giving us flexibility as a committee would be helpful for me, but that's also, I'm very new. So, for me, it's less criteria on those, still with the scorecard, but, not having rigid requirements.
I think we also have talked in the past about multi-year funding for big capital projects versus operational projects. And I think we learned some lessons with some of these early capital projects that came to us that would have benefited from a planning period. And we've talked about us maybe funding some of that planning and seeing how that fits into our overall system in Buncombe County, but also helping that organization think through what they're doing before we invest. We ended up having to invest because of the situation, as we all know, but a lot could have been learned if $100,000 had been put into some of their projects on the front end.
So for the sake of time today, I didn't hear any consensus around edits to that specific question for this application, but I did hear some priorities and points for consideration. And we know that we need to have more time during deliberation to have the multi-year conversation.
Kick this can down the road.
Kick it down the road.
That's what we do.
You captured it. So is there waiting for us?
It's gonna hit a boulder here soon, but kick it one more time.
I mean, with good reason, but yeah, we're kicking it down the road and I do think you're right. We've had some wacko years in here. They're gonna mess up the data big time.
Sure did, yeah.
Yes, and I heard what you said, Susan, about later. Wanted to talk more about evaluating the impact of the work as a whole.
Who's gonna use it and what they're gonna do with it?
What, Misty?
I said, and who's gonna use it and what they're going to do with it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to do the work to figure out, but I don't want to do it. But I really would like to see that, who we've given money to, how much it's totaled. I mean, that would be super interesting to look at, and it might influence our decisions going forward.
We can bring that in.
And if Commissioner White, I just talking about justifications.
So at this point, we have 3 years of funding or 4.
Grade for one.
I think we should our 4th year.
We have
You have 4th.
Yeah, I think we're
Yeah.
in year 5. We're planning for year 6.
Okay, so we have 3
Really?
years of reports.
And we're,
And we're in 4th year of like getting those reports back and what Okay, I was just thinking how much time we have. You have to let enough time go by to begin to see trends or, we talked about this stuff doesn't happen.
And we had a pandemic in the middle of it.
You know, as a way of wrapping up, I'll just make a comment. Working with the team that presented to the Board of Commissioners for our annual report, it was a real challenge to convey goal attainment and success and results during the pandemic time. So we know that it's not going to be all good news around.
But I can almost envision a chart that shows we put in this much money to creating additional slots, and we put in this much money to put in compensation and total additional supplemental compensation. I mean, that would be interesting for us to think about, because I know when we first started, big focus on additional slots. There was a big focus. If you can't fill them, then instead of the spotlight hitting additional slots, it should hit the workforce, whether it's additional compensation or whether it's in preparation. I mean, those are 2 different things. So I don't know. Good luck with that, Rachel.
We'll bring all the information and slice it and dice it.
So if we have a group that has asked for similar funding multiple years, are they automatically enrolled as a multi-year funding?
No.
That's my question.
So it's 2:23. We have 1 public comment, which is exciting. So I'm going to do a very up-tempo run through of our next agenda item, which is the updating you all on legislative priorities. I want to begin by saying thank you. As you all remember, sort of part of the charter of this committee is bringing forth recommendations around funding, but also helping to inform and advise policy discussions at the commission level on early childhood education. And I think this committee has really dug in on doing the work of bringing forward to full commission very robust conversations about some of the structural barriers that we continue to face and policy solutions that would address those at the local, state, and federal levels. And just want to share a quick update. The commission has retained Ward and Smith as a lobbyist firm. Beginning this last session, we joined the ranks of many, many counties across the state who have lobbyists. So Oakland County, I think, has never had one, if that's direct history, or hasn't had one in recent history, and have been working with this firm over the course of the last few months on developing a legislative agenda that will guide their work. And just wanted to report back to you all the role that early childhood priorities are playing within that legislative agenda. This will be an item for discussion at our 3 p.m. briefing today. This is the latest draft form of our policy priorities and agenda, so it will be tinkered with and adjusted a bit more. But within our Tier 1 legislative policy agenda items, there are 2 items related to early childhood education. One is, and I'll just read these verbatim as they'll be presented to us today, seek additional state funding support for early childhood education and pre-K programs, including simplifying or modifying the subsidy formula for Buncombe County. And we have asked our lobbyists to explore not just legislative, but potentially administrative level solutions on any issue that's on our agenda. The second is to seek to expand the county's ability to use tax revenue for early childhood education capital needs. As you'll recall, the latest reading of the statutory language is that when we fund capital projects, that can only be done through school systems or county-owned or county-driven capital projects. So we don't, the current legal guidance we get is we don't have the authority to give capital funding to, say, a nonprofit that wants to build a new facility unless they're partnered with a county or a school system. So advocating for more openness within those policies. And then we have an agenda relative to appropriations. And within tier 1 of that, we have an item around early childhood that reads to extend funding for early childhood stabilization subsidies, including making it permanent funding. So I want you all to know that the incredibly relevant to the conversation we've just had here together, that the policy work that this committee is helping to drive on the local level is very much shaping the state level policy and appropriations agenda that we're developing. And we'll keep you all posted as this gets finalized, and then keep you posted, hopefully with opportunities to share some updates and maybe even good news as the lobbyists we're working with get going. The session begins in January. So we'll continue to share updates as we have them. Yes.
I'd like to bring up one thing. The conversation today was great, folks. We need more like it. But I want to throw something on the table that's come up with me out talking to people the last few months. One of the big questions I continue to get about our pre-K program is, what are we doing for kids with disabilities? And that's something, folks, that we're going to have to address because it's falling through the cracks. And I hear it from parents. I've had moms come up to me with tears in their eyes, talking about why they can't, what can we do to help them find some relief for their kids, helping with pre-K. But this is something I think we've got to look at sometimes, and hopefully sooner rather than later. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you.
That's important.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Are there any announcements before we pivot into public comment? No? Okay, we have public comment. Do one of you making public comment? No, someone online?
You signed up on your way for public comment.
Nope.
No, okay.
Okay, we do not have public comment, but we're glad you're with us. And we actually are finishing 1 minute early. A reminder that our next meeting will be December 6th, 1 to 2:30 p.m. We'll be here again. Thank you all again for everyone doing the site visits, and great conversation and discussion today. Thanks to everyone for the heavy lifting as we work to keep improving the application process and materials. And with that, I will adjourn our meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good.